what to do about Halloween as a Catholic. Today I'm going to talk about how Catholics should properly observe and celebrate Halloween, All Saints, and All Souls. It's a very important feast, but the culture has confused it a lot. Before I begin with that, I want to just point out my website, slayingdragonspress.com, and ask you to please go there if you want a copy of my first book, Slaying Dragons, which is the reason why I'm able to do this work full-time, and my new release from March, The Rise of the Occult. Both have been endorsed by Bishop Athanasius Schneider, Bishop Joseph Strickland, Monsignor Rossetti, and Father Calloway, among many others. You can check out the reviews on Amazon. You can buy it directly from me at slayingdragonspress.com. I'm happy to sign the books. Just leave a note. I also have several other books which are very much enjoyed by people, especially Come Away by Yourselves, which is a guide to prayer for busy Catholics. Also, please consider supporting my work. This is a full-time apostolate. I don't have any money invested in marketing or advertising or high-tech equipment, as you can see from the way this video is made. So please support my work and go to my website, slayingdragonspress.com, and see in the upper left one of the tabs how to support. There are different links. You can also add a little bit to your orders if you order from my website, slayingdragonspress.com. But also pray for my apostolate. Share the book with your priest, bishop, friends, family. I also am happy to do talks at parishes. I've been doing that for the last 2 years since I've launched the Slaying Dragons Apostolate. Also, please like this video and subscribe. Share it around social media, wherever you can, to build the audience here, the subscriber base, so I can continue to do this work more easily. And thank you for watching the video. So the first topic for today, what to do with Halloween. So first, before we begin analyzing what we should do with Halloween in our culture today, we must first understand where the Feast of All Saints and All Souls come from. The emergence of the Feast of All Saints is connected with a few events from the early church. First, in the year 609, Pope Boniface IV dedicated the Pantheon in Rome, which was a temple to all the gods, as a church dedicated to the Blessed Virgin Mary and all the martyrs. And this was on May 13th, which is an interesting date given Our Lady of Fatima. Second, around the year 731 or so, Pope Gregory III consecrated a chapel to all the saints in St. Peter's on November 1st. Then third, around the year 830, Pope Gregory IV extended this feast to the whole church, making it a holy day of obligation on November 1st. There was also a vigil for the feast, what we would call All Hallows Eve, Halloween, from the very earliest times. In the 15th century, Pope Sixtus IV added an octave, 8 days of celebration for All Saints, which endured until 1954, when it was suppressed, and maybe one day God will bring it back. All Souls Day, the church had an early practice of remembering the souls of the faithful departed in the Mass, which we still do today. The celebration of a special day dedicated to the holy souls in purgatory, the poor souls in purgatory, began in some monasteries in the 6th century. And by the 10th century, it had spread to many dioceses throughout the world, becoming fixed in some places on November 2nd, the day after All Saints' Day. This date itself was adopted in Rome around the 13th century and became a universal feast soon after that. The liturgy of the Church is incredibly instructive for the purpose of figuring out how to celebrate Halloween as a Catholic. The pivot point for all cultural celebrations of Halloween should be the Liturgy of Christ the King, which is placed on the Sunday prior to the feast, as well as the liturgy from the Vigil of All Saints Day, and All Souls Day, in the context of the Church's teaching about death, judgment, heaven, and hell. Christ the King is celebrated just prior to Halloween every year and was placed there very intentionally by Pope Pius XI. In his document on Christ the King, when he established the feast, he said, "Before celebrating the triumph of all the saints, we proclaim and extol the glory of him who triumphs in all the saints and in all the elect." He added, "It will call to their minds the thought of the last judgment, wherein Christ, who has been cast out of public life, despised, neglected, and ignored, will most severely avenge these insults." In the prayers for Christ the King, from the liturgy, the Church asks God to grant that all the families of the Gentiles, separated by the wound of sin, may be subjected to his most loving dominion. Therefore, at Halloween, we are called to pray for all who are separated from grace, who roam after the idols of this world, that they may be healed and brought into Christ's kingdom of light. The epistle from the feast reads, from St. Paul's letter to the Colossians, "We give thanks to God the Father, who hath made us worthy to be partakers of the lot of the saints in light, who hath delivered us from the power of darkness, and hath translated us into the kingdom of the Son of his love." So this is a feast, is a proclamation. This feast is a proclamation of the power of Christ over darkness, the reign of Christ, which is unending, and the liberation of mankind from the grip of evil. From the gospel for that day, we hear, "For this was I born, and for this came I into the world, that I should give testimony to the truth." So we must let Halloween be the day of Christ the King, the day of judgment upon evil and a celebration of grace, a day to recommit ourselves to the work of holiness, to renew our baptismal vows, to bless our homes, to celebrate light in the darkness with blessed bonfires, to adorn our homes and lands with the abundance of sacramentals the Church offers us, to prepare both as warriors adorned with the armor of God and servants and sons seeking to be pleasing and welcoming to the King. Just a few days after this feast is the Vigil of All Saints. One year it happened on the same day. I think that was last year. So the Vigil of All Saints is literally Halloween, All Hallows Eve, hallow meaning holy. The epistle from this Vigil of All Saints is from the book of Revelation, and it calls to mind the Lamb that was slain, who was worthy to receive power and divinity and wisdom and strength and honor and glory and benediction. So this is an excellent statement against the worship of false gods, saying that Christ, the Lamb of God, is the only one worthy of such veneration. The epistle also states, "By thy blood thou didst ransom men for God from every tribe and tongue and people and nation, and has made them a kingdom and priests to our God, and they shall reign on the earth." Thus the theme of ransoming from the dominion of Satan, stealing souls away from him, on All Hallows Eve. The gospel then presents Christ as a person desired by the multitudes, who gather around him in a similar way to how the angels are presented in the epistle, thousands of angels attending the Lamb. When the multitudes gather around our Lord in the gospel, the passage presents to us the reality that, quote, "power came forth from him and healed them all." Thus, the Church wants the whole world to worship, honor, and come to Christ on Halloween in order to receive the power of his love and healing and the gift of sanctifying grace by which we may all become saints. So what are the actual things we should do on Halloween? The Hallowtide customs we develop must have for their purpose, in keeping with the purpose of the feast as established by the Church, orienting souls toward eternal life, highlighting the reality of death and the fact that it is unavoidable, honoring the great saints of the human race, remembering and praying for the poor souls in purgatory, presenting a careful reminder of the real possibility of damnation, all with an ultimate orientation to the need for prayer and for dependence on God. Without this, what we do could be superstitious or completely alien to Christianity. The remembrance of death, as in the martyrs and the death of Christ, must maintain life as its focus. Liturgically, the famous hymn Dies Irae, which literally is about day of wrath, day of mourning, concerns the final judgment and the end of the world, and it's sung on All Souls' Day. It is all about death and judgment and the fear of that final sentence and where we might end up when our deeds are weighed in the scales of divine justice after the days of mercy dry up. The focus on death has been a custom in the Church for millennia, particularly flowing from the sacrifice of Christ, whose death brought divine life to man, and the fact that death is the seal upon our life and all men must face that moment. There are two fascinating displays of this. One, in the history of the Church. One, what were called the Dance of Death. These are plays found in Germany, Spain, Belgium, France, England, and Italy. And Italy also had something called the Triumph of Death. These plays, accompanied by two sermons at the beginning and at the end of the play, were on the importance of reflecting on death, involving individuals dressed in skeleton costumes who represented death, leading away one by one from the emperor, someone dressed as the emperor, to a member of the lowest class of society, men of every rank to their judgment. Another example of the historical value of reflecting on death is seen in the famous Capuchin crypt, which is a monastery, and it's filled artistically with 500,000 bones from both 3,700 Capuchin monks from all over the world and the poor of Italy who were served by them. These bones were collected up until 1870 for the construction of the crypt. So when it comes to a custom like costumes, we should ask, why do we dress up like skeletons today? One form is appropriate given the dance of death and the remembrance of death. Another form is not. If we're doing so with the intention and in the context of sacred reflections, perhaps it is appropriate to dress like skeletons. What about dressing like vampires? For example, of one of many, evil things that people dress up like today. Since these represent evil, again, it would be difficult to justify dressing up like a vampire. However, there is one tradition I've heard about in which supposedly kids dressing up as demons shows how petty evil really is, or the triumph of good over evil. But we have to ask, is it healthy for a kid, for a child, to dress up like a demon? Another custom I heard about was having one person in a neighborhood dress up as a witch with the sole purpose of then being driven away, like a play, driven away by others dressed as saints or angels. Perhaps that could be justified because it serves a good purpose, especially in light of the readings mentioned earlier. And what about scary stories being told at Halloween? Well, that would depend. There are many real and impactful stories about souls appearing from purgatory, which can be creepy and a bit scary, but are nonetheless real. If they are presented in an age-appropriate manner, because we're talking about children a lot, they could definitely be part of Hallowtide. There are also many reputable tales of damned souls visiting people on earth. St. Thomas Aquinas said one reason the damned may be permitted by God to visit the earth, which is a rare event and requires a special permission by God, is for educational purposes for the living. It provides us some sort of instruction or tests us in some manner. So the approach we take when celebrating Halloween appropriately, ultimately we need to remember and preserve the essentials of the feast day. One exorcist said, we need to take it to the streets and challenge the culture about how Halloween is celebrated. He said it's not enough to say don't dress up on Halloween or simply to promote adoration that night. That's nice, he said, but we need to counter the culture and take back the feast days from the corruption of paganism and superstition and debauchery. Poland is a good example. In a 2019 article by the National Catholic Register, it talked about how Poland was seeking to purge what they called the morbid secular version of Halloween that had originated in the United States and spread worldwide. So families there are now going to cemeteries. I'm not sure when it started, when the renewal of this custom started, but it's a renewal of a custom that has been there before. Families are going to cemeteries. They leave flowers there and lanterns at the cemeteries on that day. And this comes after a week dedicated to cleaning the graves and preparing them for this little festival. And that night, when all the luminaries, the lanterns are set, the candles are lit by the graves, the whole cemetery is illuminated. And as the article pointed out, it creates a real spectacle for the observers. They also celebrate Mass in the cemetery and then have a procession where they read the names of the dead over the course of a few hours, of course praying for them along the way. And this reflects ancient customs, as I mentioned, that Poland has had, as Father Francis Weiser wrote about in a book on the traditions of the Catholic faith, which was published in 1958. So it gives us a good historical context. Other things that he mentioned in that book about how Halloween, and especially All Souls Day, was celebrated in traditional Catholic countries includes ringing the church bells at dusk the night before All Souls Day, so on All Saints' night, All Saints' evening, not the eve before, as a reminder to all the faithful in the area to pray for the holy souls in purgatory. And typically they would gather around as a family with a blessed candle and pray. Soul cakes in various parts of the world has been popular, and this is a practice where people exchange little cakes for prayers for the departed members of their family. It is a very similar tradition to trick-or-treating and a much more Catholic expression. Some areas would dedicate the octave, the 8 days for All Saints' Day, as soul nights, in which they would pray daily the rosary and daily attend Mass, all for the poor souls in purgatory. Many countries also had customs in which they would set aside a plate of food at the main meal in memory of a deceased member of the family, and then give that food to the poor. In some areas, the poor knew that they could go door to door at this time and ask for food. All Saints cakes, similar to soul cakes. All Saints cakes were braided strands of sweet bread, sweet dough, and then All Souls bread, which was made from the leftover dough, are ancient customs that emerged throughout the history of the church from adopting local pagan rites from the pre-Christian eras that existed in those areas of the world. Then there's something called soul food, which is a common expression now, but soul food was a lentil soup, a pea or lentil soup that was prepared and given to the poor with other meats and other dishes on All Souls Day. So then there's the question of, is Halloween of a pagan origin? Well, the convergence of this feast with the pagan Samhain festival on November 1st, when the church moved it to November 1st, Samhain is the festival of summer's end and the last harvest, but the convergence of these two feasts was not intentional. It was at the end of the harvest time, November 1st, and it was a more practical date for the All Saints festival in Rome because they needed to accommodate the crowds, and at the end of the harvest you had more food. Once this convergence happened, though, the church had to deal with pagan practices that were around this feast day in the lands it was evangelizing. Some of the primary pagan beliefs that influenced pagan customs were that the dead and demons roamed the earth at Samhain, pronounced Samhain, but literally it's spelled Samhain, so that's how I will pronounce it. This gave rise to many beliefs such as dressing up like evil spirits in order to blend in with them and not be noticed. The evil spirits were there roaming the earth in order to harass people. And they would also leave out food to appease the dead and keep them from bothering people as well. These beliefs have had an impact on modern customs such as dressing up on Halloween and giving out treats on Halloween. However, many Catholic customs have also had an impact on what we see and practice in our culture. So there are a lot of concerns about today's Halloween and how it's celebrated. There has been a clear encroachment of the occult into the cultural celebrations in our country today. This has been emerging for over a century and is connected to a lot of things, such as commercialism, Hollywood opportunism, residual and enduring pagan Samhain beliefs, as well as the emergence of neo-paganism in the 20th century, the modern forms of Satanism, witchcraft, and Wicca, as well as the collapse of the practice and influence of Christianity since at least the 60s. We have to recognize that many of the elements of secular Halloween are part of what we call the culture of death. There are many signs of this evil today. For one example, a lot of stores sell Halloween yard displays, and among those displays are not simply, the common vampires, ghosts, and skeletons, but also occultic symbols. One is the Hamsa hand symbol. It's a hand symbol with right in the middle is the image of an eye, and it's supposed to ward off the evil eye, but it's an occultic symbol. So you can see clearly the occultic encroachment into the celebration by what is being sold in popular stores today as a decoration. We also see an increase in occult activity, which has brought a lot of spiritual dangers. Monsignor Rossetti, a prominent exorcist who's endorsed 2 of my books from DC, said that he and his team pray all night that night of Halloween, All Hallows Eve, because there are lots of spiritual attacks that he and the other exorcists and his team, as well as those who are possessed, have endured traditionally lately in the past years on Halloween. Another sign of evil today is what we see ignorant Christians, Catholics and Protestants, doing. In one of the interviews I did for The Rise of the Occult, Adelaide, the pseudonym Adelaide, her son was exposed to a Ouija board when attending a Protestant group on Halloween weekend. They did it as part of the class, and her modernist priest was completely unwilling to help or counsel her in any way, didn't know what to do, and didn't want anything to do with this Ouija board incident. But they did it out of ignorance, and that's a big problem today. Secularized Christians are also caving to the changing cultural celebration and the meaning around Halloween. Practical atheism, which the popes have mentioned, is a problem among Catholics, where we profess belief in God, but we act like we don't believe in God at all, as well as religious indifference. These 2 things have caused a lot of Christians to yield to the powerful push and influence from the fallen world on how to celebrate such a feast as Halloween. Further, I'm going to talk about Santa Muerte in a little bit. At Halloween, people in Europe and Asia have been noted wearing Santa Muerte costumes. And Santa Muerte is a rising cult, a great disturbing demon that I'll talk about. I'm actually working on a book dedicated to this issue. A trend I'm also noticing, and other people are noticing, is there is much more gore and death, many more gore and death scenes and yard displays on Halloween than there were when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s. There are more depictions of witches standing in a circle in people's yards, either just standing in a circle or standing in a circle around a tree or even a cauldron. This is a much more occultic symbol and has nothing to do with the traditional symbols of Halloween. Many Christians are corrupting the sacred feast on their own when, by seeking to avoid the evils that they see around them, they end up rejecting the sacred in favor of fall festivals or harvest festivals in place of a sacred festival. And for those who dress up like characters from stories or video games, which do not represent either good or evil, the question has to be asked, what's the point of doing that? How is that connected to this feast of holiness and readiness for eternity? Demons, as we can all guess, have a clear and many interests in encouraging the disordering of All Hallows Eve. By doing so, a sacred day is tainted, a sacred day is disordered, and a sacred day is made questionable in the eyes of the faithful, such that they have harvest festivals instead of celebrations that pivot around All Saints and All Souls. Pagans also, by the disordering of All Hallows Eve, pagans are given an exciting form and celebration of superstition. An entertainment culture is gleefully embracing paganism and the dehumanization of man through the celebration of gore and horror on Halloween. Children's imaginations are scarred by the display of the grotesque and the wicked. Children's minds are molded by superstitious beliefs. Occultists are given a holy day and encouraged in their activities. The occult is joined to the macabre, which itself is not evil, but which then begins to look questionable to Christian observers. Holy meditations on death, such as the macabre can give, are interrupted by a pagan embrace of dehumanizing horror. Halloween is turned into a day of sin, as exorcists are warning about. So what are some of the pagan and satanic beliefs about Halloween? For many, it's known as a magical new year, or the pagan new year. It's one of 8 Wiccan feasts or sabbats. It's an essential sabbat. It's an essential feast of these 8. Some call it Samhain, again pronounced Samhain, but spelled like Samhain. Others say Halloween. For the Satanic Temple, one of the current rising public forms of modern Satanism, they call it Halloween, and they describe Halloween for them as a holiday to celebrate indulgence and embrace the darkness and its aesthetic. So it's a very diabolical feast for them, and they're taking the sacred name All Hallows Eve, Halloween, and disordering it. Some of the beliefs specifically are that the veil between this world and the spirit world is lifted. Ancestors, anyone who has died, can cross over. Wiccans are engaging in trying to talk to spirits, casting spells of protection when these spirits come around, and practicing divination. Also, mirror gazing is something that is embraced by the occult in order to communicate with spirits. Though some occultists are using mirrors to communicate with spirits, other occultists, such as one that I interviewed, are seeking to stay away from mirrors on Halloween. Helena, one of the people I interviewed for my book, The Rise of the Occult, she told me that she and her witch friends went around covering mirrors up in their homes that day. She said, this is a quote from my book, "Although connecting with them, these spirits, was something you did," she explained, "even witches wanted to do it on their own terms, not be surprised by unexpected guests. These spirits indeed came around for them on Samhain, but, as she described, quote, it was a very dark feeling, and despite what we did, you felt a presence, and I could sense that they were not all family, that it was something evil, not just Aunt Sue coming around." So that's the end of the quote from The Rise of the Occult, Helena, describing what she would do on Halloween as a witch. There's also another interesting thing, evil thing, that witches do. Wiccans and witches, I'm not sure if all Wiccans do this, but something called ghost water. So here is a quote from The Rise of the Occult as well. "A certain online witchcraft forum contained a warning from an experienced witch that, since the upcoming full moon," this was 2020, was falling on, it was a blue moon, was falling on Halloween night. It posed some dangers to those trying to make moon water that night. Moon water is made by witches by leaving a jar of water out under the moon at different phases of the moon cycle. This supposedly makes the water sacred in a specific way, which varies based on the phase of the moon at the time. Ghost water, which is regarded by witches as an effective thing for hexing, cursing people, is usually made by leaving a jar of water out in a cemetery. The warning that this witch was mentioning in the forum, the warning was issued because apparently, since, as witches believe, the veil is so thin between the visible and the invisible world at Samhain, at Halloween, the practitioner might end up making ghost water instead of moon water. The danger is that the energy from ghost water has the potential to go badly if mishandled. So she urged caution. Since ghosts, she claimed, are attracted to reflective surfaces, you might mistakenly attract them to your jar of water. She also reminded the reader that not all ghosts are friendly, so this situation may pose a hazard. So that's very interesting what they believe. You can see the superstitions in there. Also, the curses, which probably most people have heard about, that were issued by witches against Trump were done during 2020, were done on Halloween, on this blue moon. Further, the world's current largest Ouija board, known as Ouijazilla, which is in Salem, Massachusetts, which is big enough for multiple 18-wheelers to park on top of, it's in a big field, and the former title holder to the largest Ouija board, which is in a haunted hotel, at the top of a haunted hotel in Windber, Pennsylvania, they were both unveiled just before Halloween. Santa Muerte, a few details on that tied in with this, which is called the fastest growing new religious movement in the Americas. In 2001, one of the key figures in starting this and making it public was Doña Queta. She dedicated the first and the most famous shrine to Santa Muerte at midnight on Halloween. And she did this in thanks for a miracle that Santa Muerte performed for her son. Santa Muerte is known as a stupendous miracle worker, though she is a demon and promotes sin and tolerates all kinds of disorders among her followers. And another detail I'll get to in a minute. So this is the moment when Santa Muerte went from a secret devotion in Mexico to a public cult that is now, as I mentioned, the fastest growing new religious movement in the Americas. And that's according to the leading expert, Andrew Chestnut, who's studied Santa Muerte since, I believe, 2009. In 2017, Chestnut said that devotees of Santa Muerte are beginning to see this entity as the reincarnation of the Aztec goddess of death and are establishing the Day of the Dead as her unofficial feast day. So this, Chestnut said, is causing a huge panic in the church in Mexico, which is condemning Santa Muerte almost daily because it's so out of control there. So there are many perversions, inversions, and mockeries of Halloween, the sacred Halloween, today by this corruption from the occult. So some of those I'll discuss now. So the obvious effort of the fallen world and the occult to mock the sacred feast is a clear example of how the occult is working directly at being a parody, a mockery, and a counterfeit of the one true faith. This example of Halloween's corruption is good evidence. Monsignor Rossetti, mentioned earlier, he said the modern celebration of Halloween is a diabolical distortion of the authentic Halloween. The world today presents a day of darkness and fear. So this is here. I'm going to set up some of the counterfeits. So the world today presents a day of darkness and fear at the same time that the Liturgy for Christ the King and All Saints Vigil proclaims the destruction of the reign of darkness. When the world is focusing on ghost hunting for entertainment or wandering souls in search of appeasement, the church is focusing on offering prayers and sacrifices for the good of souls in purgatory, who are not wandering here but seeking to enter heaven. We have, by the world, gruesome depictions of death, instead of what the church presents, a reverence for the bodies of the saints when we honor their relics, for example. In the world, the worldly celebration of Halloween is celebrating the occult, instead of what the church is doing, which is a celebration of divine light. The world presents a passing over as death. Death is a passing over into a mysterious realm, instead of focusing on the need for a holy death and purification, so we may enter heaven quickly. The world is presenting the worship of Santa Muerte, a hideous skeleton deity who protects the one who worships her from judgment, instead of depicting skeletons in order to prepare oneself for the unavoidable moment when our deeds are weighed in the scales of divine judgment. People, even Catholic youth, are embracing the darkness, the occult, and grave sins on the night of Halloween, believing that this night doesn't count. As one exorcist commented, he said, quote, I have adults come to me saying, you can cross over barriers and boundaries that you can't normally, but today you can. And he said, they also say, you can meet some real witches, get a little scared, but it's just for the night. Then you go back to normal life. But as he said, the evil that they fraternize with will follow them home, and then they have a spiritual and dangerous mess to clean up. While our Lord gives plenty of warnings against hell, embracing a season and a celebration of fear and fright is more akin with the devil's approach. The Roman ritual, for example, states in the prayers used by the priest in the exorcism that regarding the possessed person, by falling prey to the craftiness of the devil, the ancient adversary, the archenemy of the earth, the possessed person suffers from an onslaught of torment. The devil, it says, enshrouds the person in shuddering fear, renders the mental faculties befuddled, keeps him bewildered by making him sore afraid, holds him in a state of perturbation, and strikes terror within him. Thus we can see that the devil's motive is fear and torment, making us afraid. As mentioned earlier, occultists who worship Santa Muerte are about to establish a feast day for the demon on the Feast of All Saints or All Souls, a great inversion and mockery of the sacred feast. So, what are some common things we should avoid at Halloween? With the evil clearly in view, it is obvious that the culture has many customs that have become commonplace and which thoughtless Christians sometimes embrace in an effort to join the revelry and have some fun. However, we must be very careful with things like horror movies. Most of these are disordered and present terrible theology of ghosts and demons, can be very confusing and also harmful to the imagination and to the soul. Ouija boards, these are very common, easily accessible, but they're also very dangerous. Even many occultists won't go near Ouija boards. That's really important to know, and I'll be talking about that in an upcoming book, hopefully released in a month or so. Ghost hunting apps, again, will be presented in my upcoming book. This is a very trendy thing that I heard about both from exorcists and former occultists, but it functions just like a Ouija board and poses the same dangers. You can look these up in the app stores for your phone and check the reviews and see what people are using them for. It's very enlightening and disturbing. Drugs, this is a common thing at Halloween as well, but while these are always dangerous, in the context of dabbling with the occult at Halloween, it can cause the door to demons to swing wide open and welcome all kinds of problems. Haunted houses. Typically, these are inhabited by demons if it's a real haunted house. And demons are the ones that want this kind of attention, not souls from purgatory. Also, even if it's not a real haunted house, a desire to see spirits, ghosts, or demons is a dangerous form of curiosity, which can be in itself an invitation for a demon to enter your life. One example of the confused culture related to haunted houses and whether a ghost might be in your house is from Teen Vogue, this online magazine. It has an article from a few years ago called 10 Signs Your Home May Be Haunted. It lists several signs that are accurate, but also includes things like foul odors, temperature drops, and shadow people among the signs that a ghost is present, all of which are actually indications of a demon being present. Plus, this article recommends superstitious practices to dispel the spirit, like black salt and the use of specific stones, all of which are just going to cause more problems. However, to their credit, this article does twice warn against Ouija boards, which is a very smart thing to do. We should also purge our minds of any superstitions that we may currently hold as a result of growing up and living in this occult-inclined society. Some of these are that souls from purgatory are released on November 2nd. Souls from purgatory are not released on November 2nd. We're simply encouraged and strengthened in our prayers by the church to pray for them that day. The veil is not thinner between this world and the next during Hallowtide. However, one thought along those lines, which you could see this as a perversion, as an inversion of the actual feast. So one thought along those lines is that our communion as the church militant with the church suffering in purgatory and with the church triumphant in heaven might be more tangible during Hallowtide because of all the graces being distributed by the church and the church's encouragement for us to pray and the power of the church triumphant in heaven to intercede for us. And also because our faith on those days is stronger, and this faith binds us more closely to our Lord and to these invisible realities. The veil does not become thinner, but our faith becomes stronger, and our faith can then perceive beyond the veil and also touch beyond the veil, spiritually speaking. Evil spirits do not roam the earth with greater authority on Halloween, and departed spirits do not need to be appeased or fed on Halloween. So though there is a clear place for the macabre, for the focus on death, in the customs of our faith, perhaps it would be better for Halloween to resemble Christmas in the outward display of lights and candles. At Christmas, the light has entered the darkness of our world. At Halloween, we celebrate the fact that that same divine light has transformed individual men and women into reflections and imitations of that divine light, bringing grace and healing and miracles to a broken humanity and a broken world. We should celebrate the victory, not the defeat, at Halloween. We are not at a moment in the history of our culture or our country in which we can afford to surrender a day to Satan. So keep All Hallows Catholic. God bless you.